I used to work with Brian when he was in Vancouver, when he was at UBC, because, so I'm Linda, I'm a reporter for Global TV, and I do a lot of science reporting, and so Brian was my go-to guy, and now Heather is, so it's very comfortable for me to be up here right now. And it's interesting to hear some of the things you've been talking about, because I thought, oh, they know that? But I guess it's not a secret within the industry what happens. I guess I'll start first of all by letting you know a little bit about how I tend to get my stories. Sometimes I'm assigned by my assignment editor who hears about things in various ways. Very often I directly receive press releases. Sometimes it's less formal. I'll just get a call or an email from someone who thinks that maybe this thing is interesting to me. And sometimes I just find something that's interesting and I think I'd like to know more about that. Well, let's do it on the clock so I get paid. And like once I wanted to know, what would it be like to milk a goat? And so I found a story about how the artisanal cheese business was increasing, and I thought, oh, great, there's a goat farmer out in the valley that makes goat cheese. I'll go milk a goat and do a story on it. So you can use your job to have a lot of fun as well. When you pitch to an assignment editor, it can be tricky because assignment editors are typically A-type people who are super crazy busy, so much so that you're honestly lucky if they read past the first line of a press release. And the other challenge is when you're talking about science-related stories, most of them don't have any science background. Many don't have a lot of science interest. And so they might miss what is important about this report that's coming across their desk. So this is where it pays to know the reporters that are going to be interested in that story and are going to have some knowledge. So if I get a press release from Heather, she's assuming that I might understand it, and often I do, and that I can then go to my assignment editor and explain to him why this is something that I want to do and why it's something he should let me do. But honestly, I've been there 35 years. He knows it's just ridiculous to try to tell me no, so I'm going to do it anyway. Having said that, I'm just going to touch on something that Heather brought up, and that is that it's really hard these days to find, in particular, I know television reporters who specialize in anything. Maybe still politics and crime, you're going to find that. But science is kind of pushed to the back burner, and I don't think there's as many people who specialize in that anymore. One of the problems is that there's not as many viewers or readers or listeners, depending on what news media you're talking about. They're going elsewhere. They're going to the internet. And as a result, the advertisers' dollars are going with them. And so newsrooms are really working with very lean budgets. They're cutting back as much as they can on senior reporters. They try to encourage us to quit, and often a lot of them do that. And so you don't have as many experienced reporters, and also because you don't have as many reporters overall, it's a real luxury to have a beat reporter, to have a reporter that specializes on one thing. This is distracting, but I am going to show you a video in a moment. Sorry, I didn't have all those other fun slideshows that everyone else had. Where was I? Right, so. The problem with that is that the interviewee, the person who is going to be interviewed about a story more than ever, has to really know how to get across information in a way that they're going to be, that the viewer is going to be interested, that the reporter wants to hear. You know, many times I'll get a brilliant researcher with a really fascinating project, but he or she just can't convey it in simple, interesting terms. And as much as these guys try to teach them, sometimes it just doesn't work. So the advantage of having a reporter who knows and understands is that I'll often, after they say something, say, okay, let's try it this way. Instead of saying these big words, let's try using words that people without a science background understand. Sometimes they literally don't know what those simple words are. And so you have to, I try not to feed lines, but I help to make them understand in a way that I can use the clip and they can get across their meaning. So to give a good interview, you really have to know how to kiss, you know, keep it simple, stupid, and it really applies. If you go on and on and on with an answer, what you have to keep in mind is all I'm looking for is a 10 or 12-second clip. So you're making my job harder, and also you're forcing me to edit what you're saying. So try to keep it concise and simple. And that doesn't mean that you have to speak in 10-second clips. But just be aware that if you keep focused, if you keep, thinking about what was the question, how can I most simply answer it, feel free to take 30 seconds a minute, and I'll find the clip in there. And if I don't, you can be sure that I'm going to ask you again. But again, if you have a reporter these days who doesn't really understand, they're not going to ask you again. They're going to make the best with what they have, and it may not be very good. So edit yourself. Don't leave it up to us. The kinds of stories that we're interested in, as Heather said, are things that are new. So that's really important. But also it has to be something that matters to people in general. Does it affect them in any way? Will it affect them in any way? Or will it affect someone that they care about? Although sometimes it can just be plain interesting. There was a recent story out of UBC just a few days ago about a young student. She was just about to get her Bachelor of Science, and she discovered 4 planets that NASA absolutely missed. So that's interesting, because here's this young student who's just getting her first degree, and she's beating NASA at its own game. And then to make it even more interesting is it gets kind of fun, because it turns out she's a Trekkie, like Star Trek. And William Shatner's in town, and he comes and he meets her. And what made that work for us is that some people took pictures of her with Shatner, and that was really important, because if we were going to mention that in a story, it really helps to have pictures, and we did. So that was just an all-around really fun and informative story. As was also mentioned, it's important to have a local angle. So were any local researchers involved in this? Is there any way that we can tie this to where we are and who we are? That always helps. And having a local interview is hugely important. Telephone interviews don't work for television news. And Skype is better than a telephone interview, but it doesn't look good and it doesn't sound good. What we really want is one-on-one, and that also then gives us the advantage of getting B-roll, which is hugely important again for television news, which is a very visual medium. So we want to see the person we're interviewing in the area where they do their work, whether it's the lab or the field, wherever it is. We need pictures so we can say, this is so-and-so, this is where they work, because you got to give the institution a plug. And just to have more of a sense of it. Sometimes all you're going to get is pipetting in a lab, but that's better than nothing, right? So keep in mind that it's really important to try to get local people that we can use. And failing that, if you can supply video of your own, maybe you have an in-house videographer who can shoot an interview for you and ask a bunch of pertinent questions. At least then we can get some quality video of the person delivering the information. Now, I've already said visuals are hugely important, and I think the way to help you understand it, if you don't already, is to show you a story. I think I'll start with a story that is really visual to begin with. But the problem is that there were certain things that I couldn't get myself. The story, now, okay, we're queued up with this. Let's start with a non-visual story. This is a story that's very science-y. It's mostly in a lab. So how do I tell that with pictures? Well, let's see, how did I do that? Pay attention, if you can, to the audio tapes that link the sound bites of the researcher. Those are the things we really need the pictures to cover.
Before 5-year-old Sam was even born, his parents enrolled him in a study aimed at finding out why asthma rates have nearly quadrupled in the last 30 years.
So we've seen this huge increase in rates of asthma really in one generation. And so the focus has been on what's different in our environment.
One big difference is how clean we are these days. We're almost obsessed with it. And then there are antibiotics. They can be lifesavers, but they can also be misused.
We sort of have this theory that every microbe should be a dead microbe, and we're now starting to realize that maybe we're not getting exposed to microbes early in life, And then if we see them later in life, we're not used to them, we react to them.
What UBC and BC Children's Hospital researchers wanted to learn was, do bacteria in an infant's intestines play a role in the development of asthma?
So these are the stool samples from the children at 3 months of age.
What we did is we analyzed the microbes in the intestines or in the fecal samples from the intestines of these kids.
What they discovered was that 4 types of bacteria were not present in the intestines of the infants who went on to develop asthma. But what role would a gut bacteria play in the development of a lung disease?
What we know now is that the bacteria that are in our intestines in those first few months of life are actually really important for training the immune system to be healthy.
Without that training, the immune system can become confused and launch unnecessary attacks in the lungs that cause inflammation.
I think this is the first time anyone has ever proven that gut microbes early in life affect asthma.
This is the first step in, I think, an important journey to our ultimate goal of being able to prevent asthma in children.
In children, because the critical time seems to be in their first 100 days of life.
And this one's the last one, okay?
Fortunately, it seems that Sam does not have asthma.
Well, that sounds really good today.
More studies are needed before therapy can be created and approved. In the meantime,
We should, think more about exposing your kids to, the world they live in instead of trying to keep them away from it. That's how we evolve. That's humans.
Linda Aylesworth, Global News.
Okay, so one of the things that helped that story work was we had that little boy, and that humanized the story. Whenever possible, if you can get real people other than the researchers. Stop. I don't even know what this is. Is this my next one? Thank you very much. But getting that child having an asthma test would have been difficult for me to do, because when you think of it, reporters have 8 hours, television reporters, 8 hours to conceive a story or receive a story, to find the people to interview, to get to the people, to do the interview, to figure out the B-roll, to get back to the station, to log the tape, to write the story, to edit the story, and then to get it to air. So I don't have a lot of time to see, gee, I wonder if some doctor somewhere is doing an asthma test on a little child. So I think it was Children's Hospital helped to arrange that for me, because they thought in advance, oh, she's going to want a patient. I'm always going to want a patient if I can have one. They talked about poo. They showed me poo. So whenever they talk about, I want to see that. So that's why that story was more visual and less boring. I hope it wasn't too boring. Plus, Brett Finley, if you know him, he's very famous up here. He's an amazing interview. The first time I interviewed him, and I was just starting doing science reporting, we were doing a story on E. coli, and he wanted to describe to me how E. coli worked to infect cells, so he came prepared with a bagel, a syringe, and a pot of ink. And he just sucked the ink up into the syringe and jabbed it into the bagel, put it in the bagel, and then cut the bagel open and said, you see, this is how E. coli gets its poison and its toxins into the cell. Those are really fun things if you can think of them. Okay, some stories are really visual. I was lucky enough to be sent up to Haida Gwaii just a couple of weeks ago, and if you're not from here, Haida Gwaii used to be known as the Queen Charlotte Islands, and it's an amazing archipelago off our central coast. It's actually known as the Galapagos of the North. One of the stories that I did up there had to do with the move to eradicate rats that were introduced to the islands in the late 1700s by explorers. They literally jumped ship, and they're good swimmers, so they have through the years been moving out to all the islands. And the problems is they're devastating seabird populations. And so I did a story on that, and it was incredibly visual. We got lots of great stuff. But what I couldn't get were the rats. I only had a couple of days. And I couldn't get, you're going to see this wonderful moment where these little ancient murrelets, they hatch and then they run down to the sea where their parents are calling them. And they're dashing in the dead of night because they don't want to get eaten. But I didn't have that stuff. But Parks Canada, which were the people that were promoting this story, they were able to get the video from their researchers. So it all of a sudden became a much more visual story.
At night, the ancient murrelets come into the colony to breed and look around and find a place to nest.
The Lesquike Bay Conservation Society studies and worries about a small seabird called the ancient murrelet here on the east coast of Haida Gwaii.
They are really susceptible to predators. Because of that, the populations are quite unstable right now, and we don't really know whether some of these colonies will survive.
It's just up in the forest ahead there, so just watch your step getting off.
Parks Canada, along with the Haida Nation, has also been working on the murrelet's behalf,
We'll just cut up past those spruces.
trying to save them by eradicating the islands of a voracious intruder, rats, introduced in the 1700s by European sailing ships.
One of the crew members commented that he observed a lot of rats jumping off, and he even speculated at that time that there would be perhaps quite an impact to the native animals.
Since then, they've spread to even the most remote islands on the archipelago, taking advantage of the fact that murrelets nest in burrows on land.
They're not much heavier than a rat, so they're very easy prey for rats, especially the chicks and the eggs.
If the rats don't get them in the burrows, they intercept the chicks during their frantic break for the sea just 2 days after they hatch. The solution? Eradicate the rats. They found the most effective way is to pepper the infested islands with poisonous pellets designed to help spare harmless native species.
In the fall season, animals are looking for berries, and this is dyed a bright green, which is indicative of unripe berries, so it makes it less palatable.
They monitor their success with audio recording units like these.
Well, what I find really exciting about these units is that we don't have to capture birds. We don't have to disturb them in their daily lives.
Back at Parks Canada's floating camp, Carrie downloads the audio recordings, first from an island still infested with rats.
A screen of blank. No birds at all.
But the audiographs from an island without rats?
Oh, it's the best. It's the best sound of a healthy island.
Slowly but surely, silent islands are becoming alive again. Ancient murrelets and many other affected seabird species are enjoying cautious comebacks, but the work is far from over.
In the longer term, it would be nice to be able to conduct these eradications on some of the larger islands that have some of the larger seabird colonies. We're gradually kind of working up in scale.
Linda Aylesworth, Global News.
It's really rare to get sent out of town these days. Like, I couldn't believe my luck that they let me go up there. Of course, in 4 days, they expected me to do 5 stories, and I did, because they want their money's worth. But anyway, so you can help yourself by providing video whenever possible that the media just isn't going to be able to get themselves. So whether it's rats or murrelet chicks, or if it's research going on in a restricted area, you know, if you can somehow get video, and if not, that stills, that's really going to help, number one, getting the media outlet interested, and then also give them hell. And then also to have a good story in the end, because it's in your best interest that we do a good job. So to conclude, I'd just like to say something you all know, which is that science is amazing. And I think it behooves all of us that get it and love it to help the lay public understand it, to make it as interesting and understandable as possible. And while it is, yes, more tricky and more difficult to convey it to people that don't have a science background, I find it really a lot of fun and hugely rewarding. And I'm really glad that this is something all of you do, and I expect to do it for a few more years. Thanks very much.